What's poppin', boys? Coming at you with our third video on this channel. Thank you so much for all the support so far. I really do appreciate it. Today, we are diving into my top 10 Dynasty wide receivers. So I think a little bit comes to rankings and thinking of rankings, and when you're looking at keep, trade, cut, and when you're looking at player profiler and seeing ADPs, especially for when you're trying to do Dynasty and comparing it to redraft, a lot of things come into play. And so I know a lot of people were asking after the last two videos, like how do you balance, competitive teams versus, rebuilding teams. I'm actually going to address that on Friday in my Friday video. So we'll dive into that. Today we're talking about the top 10 Dynasty wide receivers, and my Dynasty wide receiver 1 is going to be Ja'Marr Chase. Now, it's really close between Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson. I totally understand that. I think the thing that we have to remember is just these two guys are really talented. So if you have Justin Jefferson, your wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, over Ja'Marr Chase, I am not going to fight you. I'm not going to argue with you. I just think it's really tight. I mean, Ja'Marr Chase, the reason I like Ja'Marr Chase more than I like Justin Jefferson is just the fact that he's tied to Joey Burrow. Joe Burrow is a top 6, 7 Dynasty asset right now, whereas Kirk Cousins, he has the extension, but hopefully they start passing a lot more in their offense this year with the addition of the new head coach. I know they've been talking that Dalvin Cook has even mentioned that they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more and become a lot more pass-happy of an offense, which is absolutely amazing, especially since they brought, like I said, the head coach over from the Rams. But the reason, like I said, Ja'Marr Chase does have to compete with T. Higgins, but there's plenty of balls to be had here in Cincinnati. If we look last year, wide receiver 5 on a points per game basis, he was averaging 17.9 fantasy points a game. The thing that really gets it for me is he had 1,532 air yards, and he had receiving yards of 1,455. That is absolutely crazy. Had 128 targets with only 81 receptions, and he had 17 games played. The connection was just on point with Joey Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase, which of course they played together in college, so you would expect that to happen. But to produce like that as a rookie, the only way we can go up, I imagine this year, if I'm projecting out, he will actually end up with 140 to 145 targets, and those receptions will be more closer to 90, which will probably give him receiving yards upwards of 1,500. And, he had 13 receiving touchdowns. No reason to see why that couldn't go up to 15. I know touchdowns are volatile, so it's kind of hard to project that on a year-to-year basis, but wide receiver 5 on a points per game basis, no reason that you couldn't see him being a little bit higher, like a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, which in a redraft league, you're going to have to draft him like that. But we're talking Dynasty. So Ja'Marr Chase is my wide receiver 1. They improved the offensive line. They have a solid running game. I mean, what more could you ask for? Ja'Marr Chase, they can't necessarily double team him because someone else is going to be open. Kind of preluding this before, but my wide receiver 2 is going to be Justin Jefferson. Nothing here to compare if you're, like I said, you're competing or debating between Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase, especially in a startup. Both guys are absolutely elite. If we look at how Justin Jefferson has performed his 2 years in the league, wide receiver 9 as a rookie, averaging 17.1 fantasy points per game. Last year, getting up to 19.4 at wide receiver 4 on a points per game basis. Imagine this year if he just gets up to 20, 21. He'd be like the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2. Justin Jefferson, absolute stud. You're drafting him in the first round of your Dynasty League startups, whether it is Superflex or whether it is one quarterback. Nothing to compare. I mean, you just hope that Kirk Cousins can stay consistent and just keep throwing the ball his way because he likes to make things happen. And he has absolutely great dance moves when he scores a touchdown, which also may add to his Dynasty value. Enjoy watching Justin Jefferson. Don't really have a lot more to say than he is my wide receiver 2. My wide receiver 3 is Ceedee Lamb. Right here in the rankings is kind of when I start to lose a little bit about what exactly is happening, because it gets a little bit dicey on these wide receiver rankings. And the thing is, I've watched these videos for years where, these creators, these fantasy people are creating and putting out their rankings on a year-to-year basis. I mean, I remember when DK Metcalf was the wide receiver 3. People were putting him as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and then last offseason, then of course this offseason you look, and he's in the top 15 maybe, top 20. I guess we'll see where he falls in my rank. But my wide receiver 3 is going to be Ceedee Lamb. Ceedee Lamb has kind of underperformed to what Dynasty managers and the Dynasty community has really expected over the last few years. Comes in as a rookie, shows immense flashes, just really skillful catches, is really just, you just could see that, this guy's going to be a stud. Averaged 13.6 fantasy points per game, which put him as wide receiver 33 his rookie season back in 2020. Like I said, 13.6 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 33. Last season, improves it by 1 point. 14.6, puts him at wide receiver 18, which goes to show you wide receiver 2s, they're a dime a dozen. But the thing that was impressive the most last season compared to the previous season is the fact that he improved his air yards from 988 air yards his rookie year to 1,123 his sophomore year in the NFL. At the same time, by doing that, he also improved his targets, went from 111 to 120, even though I debate that should have been a little bit higher because of the Michael Gallup injury. His receptions went up 5 from 74 to 79. He has really underperformed. I don't know what else to say. Expectations are that this dude's going to be a monster. I think a lot of dynasty managers are expecting that he makes that jump this year. I really hope so. He doesn't have to compete with Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup is injured, so Ceedee Lamb is going to be the wide receiver 1 with Dalton Schultz playing a backup role to Ceedee Lamb. We are going to see this year very clearly whether Ceedee Lamb is the wide receiver 3 or not. So, if you're like me, you might be a little bit hesitant. You have him on a lot of your dynasty rosters, and you think, now might be the time to get out. Wide receiver, a lot of people have him in their top 5 dynasty wide receivers. You don't want to have the same thing that happened with DK Metcalf when the value all of a sudden goes down and then he has to regain the value. It might just be better to sell high, tier down, get some extra assets, depending on your league mates. I got one guy in my league. Hopefully he watches this. His name's Jordan. He's always after Ceedee Lamb. He's been pretty quiet about Ceedee Lamb this offseason. So I think a lot of people are hesitating and are a little bit worried about the potential that he has for this year. I still have hope. I'm holding out hope, but that's the only reason that he's still at my wide receiver 3. My wide receiver 4 is going to be A.J. Brown. What a monster. I mean, A.J. Brown, there's not enough things to say. You watch him on the football field, you're like, this guy is insane. He comes in as a rookie in 2019, averages 13.6 fantasy points per game, which put him at wide receiver 30, kind of burst on the scene. Anyone remembers the slant that he took to the house against the Falcons? That bad boy was incredible. Then last year, of course, plays 14 games, got injured a little bit, knick-knack, but he still averaged 17.7 fantasy points per game back in 2020, which put him at the wide receiver 6. Everyone was hype. Everyone was really excited. I know he only played like the 14 games, but even in the 14 games, he averaged 106 targets, 70 receptions. Insane. Just insane efficiency that he was going off of. Last season, only played 13 games. I know that made a lot of fantasy managers upset. Had 105 targets, though, so he plays a less game, but still getting really close in targets. Had 63 receptions for 869 yards. He had 1,150 air yards, as well as only had 5 receiving touchdowns, which put him as the wide receiver 24 on a points per game basis with 13.9. Now, A.J. Brown, none of that really matters anymore because, of course, he's going to a whole new offense. Going to the Philadelphia Eagles, where, of course, instead of Ryan Tannehill throwing the ball, he has Jalen Hurts throwing him the ball. He's playing on the most talented offense that he's played on so far. The problem when you look at A.J. Brown is you're worried about the target share because, of course, Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert are right there with him, of course, and you have Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders with the running game. The thing that I have to continue to remind myself about AJ Green is it's never been about the targets. This dude has just always been hyper efficient. He's done it for 3 straight years. Why am I now doubting, worried about the targets when I wasn't that worried 2 or, after his rookie season? I think we just have to understand that this is the man he is. Now, imagine if this year all of a sudden he gets 120 targets. This man might be a top 5 wide receivers on a points per game basis. We just have to worry about those injuries. He seems to always get knick-knacked up. Nothing serious. Yeah, I know. Well, kind of serious. You have all the rumors of the knee surgeries and the things with the knees. You hope that he's got all that taken care of. But as a wide receiver, not as concerned as if he was a running back, kind of like Todd Gurley. A.J. Brown is absolutely going to kill it this year, and that is why I have him as my wide receiver 4. At my wide receiver 5, I have Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, what a legend. No one saw it coming except me. Last offseason, traded for Kupp in a bunch of leagues because you know what? Went after Robert Woods. Everyone was telling me no because everyone in the fantasy community was like, Robert Woods is absolutely going to demolish. And I saw the upside that Cooper Kupp had with the touchdowns. Drafted him in a ton of leagues. He won me a ton of chips. I'm not saying that I'm like a fantasy god or anything, but it's pretty close when that might be my one hot take that I got right. Cooper Kupp, when you look at the career that he had, 2019, of course, tears his ACL back in 2018. 2019 plays 16 games, 16.9 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 7. 2020 plays 15 games, averages 13.9 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 30. We go to last year. Let's just go through these numbers because they're absolutely insane. 17 games, 191 targets, 145 receptions, 1,947 receiving yards, 1,590 air yards, so clearly doing a lot after the catch. 16 total receiving touchdowns, averaged 25.9 points per game, which put him, of course, as the wide receiver 1 on a points per game basis and also the season long. Now, Cooper Kupp is about to turn 29 years old. There's a few reasons I am not worried about his age. Your league mates that have Cooper Kupp that might be rebuilding or even slightly competing might be trying to sell him off, and this might be a good time for you to go buy, because this is the thing. Cooper Kupp, I think, has solid 2 more years left. He's got Matthew Stafford throwing in the ball, and if you watch the way he plays, dude is not overly athletic. It's not like he's Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones in their prime, where they were just like mossing people to get the ball. Cooper Kupp, really slick on the routes, can get in and out of his cuts really quick, and of course, Matthew Stafford and him go to breakfast every morning, so Matthew Stafford promises an additional like 3 to 4 targets a game. That is another reason why I have Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 5. If you can get any of the guys I mentioned before for Cooper Kupp, I might do it just based on age. I don't know if you're probably not getting Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase for Cooper Kupp, but if you can get AJ Brown, I might do it. But the thing is with Cooper Kupp, you just know that he's got those 2 years left. He's got Matthew Stafford. The offense is tailored kind of around passing, and they just got rid of Robert Woods, his league mate, and of course added Allen Robinson. I'm not that concerned because Robert Woods was the RB12 on the same time that Cooper Kupp was still the wide receiver 1. I'm not that worried about the Allen Robinson signing, especially considering the fact that they got rid of Robert Woods. Allen Robinson's going to just slide in, take the targets that Robert Woods was getting, and we need to take a step back. Robert Woods, I know he tore his ACL, I think it was week 8. Up until that point, Robert Woods was the wide receiver 12, not on a points per game basis, but just overall into the season, while Cooper Kupp was still the wide receiver 1. So there's no reason to believe that Allen Robinson can eat while Cooper Kupp is still eating. It's actually better for Cooper Kupp because they're going to have to focus not just on him. I know he's going to still probably get triple covered this year, but no worries. I think he's so talented and knows exactly what's happening that even if he regresses just a little bit this year, if you look at the numbers, he's still going to be the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. So still be drafting him high. I would still be drafting him high in redraft, but especially for Dynasty, if you're trying to compete, you're probably going to have to shell out a little bit more of a pretty penny than maybe last offseason you were able to get. But I'm going full bore into Cooper Kupp again as my wide receiver 5 this year. My wide receiver 6 is going to be T. Higgins. Now, T. Higgins, what an animal. Like, again, my Cincinnati fanboys just coming out. I think a lot of people are concerned about T. Higgins just in the fact that now he has to compete with Jamar Chase, but I'm one of those people that say, hey, these 2 wide receivers can eat. I just kind of talked about it with the Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson duo. Same exact thing that's going to happen with T. Higgins. If you look, rookie year, averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game, put him as wide receiver 38. A lot of people were worried about it. Of course, last year comes out, averages 15.7 points per game, put him out as wide receiver 12. So he was a wide receiver 1 on a points per game basis last year while still competing with Jamar Chase, who ended up as a top 5 wide receiver. No reason that both of those guys can't do that again and improve their efficiency. We look, he only played 14 games last year. He had 110 targets for 74 receptions. This is the thing. He only had 6 receiving touchdowns. T. Higgins, 6'4", 220. Dude is a monster in the end zone. So I think there's going to be a few times where they're going to be throwing the fade a little bit more to T. Higgins. Could easily see that number go up to 10 touchdowns. If they do that, all of a sudden he is a top 8 wide receiver. T. Higgins, easy buy in Dynasty. Your league mates might be a little bit worried with the whole Jamar Chase, wide receiver 2. But if they actually looked at the numbers, they would easily be like, I would take this wide receiver on any team. And that is another reason why T. Higgins is my wide receiver 6. My wide receiver 7 is going to be Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs, what a guy. We all remember and saw what happened when he was the wide receiver 3 2 seasons ago, averaged 20.5 fantasy points per game. First year with Josh Allen, that amazing connection that the Bills developed between them. It was just amazing to see. And then, of course, last year fell off a little bit. Averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game as the wide receiver at 9. I think if we look, target share-wise, he was still the same. Back in 2020, had 166 targets. Last year, had 164. Big difference was receptions. In 2020, had 127 receptions compared to last year, he had 103. Now, air yards, about the same. He actually had 2 more receiving touchdowns last year, so I think it was just him getting a little bit unlucky with some of those catches. So this year, same exact thing. Gabe Davis is emerging on the other side. They finally figured out a little bit their running game towards the end of the season. It's not great, but it's okay. And Dawson Knox also kind of coming in over the middle. So I don't think there's any reason that his target share is going to go down. I think actually it's just going to be more improved targets based on the receiving weapons around him getting better, taking a little bit more of the coverage away. And Stefon Diggs, even though people may say he's getting a little bit old, he kind of is. He is 28.6 years old, which will put him at 29 this offseason. These wide receivers, they're playing solidly until 30, 31. So if you're competing, Stefon Diggs, easy buy. He'll help you go get that chip this season, being a top 10 redraft option. But in Dynasty, he's connected to Josh Allen, maybe the QB1. In Dynasty rankings, we'll see where I am on that in a future video. But Stefon Diggs, easy buy. I would go buy him. but especially him being my wide receiver 7. I have Deebo Samuel as my wide receiver 8. Now, Deebo Samuel, is he a wide receiver? Is he a running back? I don't know, but the dude is good. The dude is good. You had a lot of reasons of skepticism this offseason, him wanting to be traded, what's happening between Jimmy G, Trey Lance. There's just a lot of questions that are up in the air with Deebo. But the thing we know is he's electric with the ball in his hands. First 2 seasons in the NFL, kind of riddled by injuries. I guess 2019 he wasn't. His rookie year had played 15 games, but still just felt like he wasn't maybe his whole self. He was the wide receiver 34 on a points per game basis. Everyone was hyped though because he kind of came on late. 2020 only played 7 games because he got injured. And then kind of tanked Deebo's value. Last offseason, he was kind of in that wide receiver 30 range where you're drafting him in Dynasty leagues. And then he freaking went off this last year with 120 targets, 77 receptions, which is actually the most impressive, 1,405 receiving yards, had air yards of 971, which means that he was creating a lot of those off the catch. If any of us remember, they were doing a lot of dump offs to Deebo. They would be like, take it like 70 yards to the house. And he only had, though, this is the most impressive fact about this, only 6 receiving touchdowns. I do know he had some handoffs that didn't get counted. So I think the thing is, Deebo, like I said, was the wide receiver 3 on a points per game basis last year. I'm a little bit worried about the way they're using him more as a running back because there's going to be more wear and tear on Deebo. He is also not like a spring chicken either. He is 26 years old, which is not necessarily young if you're putting him kind of as a wide receiver running back hybrid. I don't know. I think Deebo might be the mystery of dynasty rankers and how they see him. He might end up playing until 31, and then all of a sudden you bought him now, you overpaid for him, and it works out. I just think right now you're going to have to overpay for him, and whoever has him knows that. I think if you're trying to sell, it's time to sell, but it's maybe not the time to buy Deebo. But I do think he's a solid option, and that is why I have him as my wide receiver 8. I preluded to this guy earlier, and this is my wide receiver 9 is going to be DK Metcalf. Now, DK Metcalf, his dynasty stock is not good right now at all. If we actually go to keep, trade, cut, DK Metcalf is right now going off, I guess, as the wide receiver 8, so it's kind of right in line with where I have him. My thing with DK Metcalf, of course, is he's playing for Seattle, who has not been notorious for throwing the ball and now just lost Russ. If we look back, of course, last year in 2020, he was the wide receiver 10 on a points per game basis with 17, of course, had massive amounts of touchdowns, killed it the first 10 weeks of the season, and then kind of cooled off. Last season, if we look at what happened, he had 129 targets, so same amount of targets that he had in 2020, but had 75 receptions for 967 yards, which was about 400 less receiving yards. But he did have 12 receiving touchdowns, which was more than what he had in 2020, which put him as the wide receiver 20. Now, I expect that touchdown number to go down because we do not know who's throwing the ball. Is it Drew Lock? Is it Geno Smith? Or is it going to be like a Baker Mayfield? I don't know. But like I said, we're playing Dynasty, so we're looking long-term. This DK Metcalf is the closest thing we've had to Calvin Johnson in a long time. We know what he is. He's improving the route running, and he's only 24 years old. I mean, if you're looking at this, we have 5 more years of just elite DK Metcalf production. And so if you are if you're competing, rebuilding, I don't care what stage you're in, go see if you can get DK Metcalf for the cheap. Because I bet if you go and look and see what the value is, you'll be like, oh, that's easy. I'll go get DK Metcalf. Because a lot of people are soured on DK Metcalf. Now, if it is a fully rebuilding team, they might not be interested. But don't offer those 2023 picks, but maybe offer some other pieces. Try to leverage up to get DK Metcalf. Because I do think he is a superstar. And I do think once he gets into either a system, if he doesn't resign with Seattle and improves his quarterback play, easy top 5 dynasty wide receiver for the next 2 or 3 years. At my wide receiver 10, we are going to have Jaylen Waddle. Now, Jaylen Waddle's stock, I think, got up to about wide receiver 6 or 7 earlier this season on keep, trade, cut. But of course, the news and signing of Tyreek Hill dropped him down in the rankings. Everybody was a little bit concerned. Oh, Tyreek Hill is going to take all the carries. Oh, Tyreek Hill is going to get all the receptions. Jaylen Waddle is now playing second fiddle. I agree with all of those takes. I think Jaylen Waddle this year for redraft is going to be a little bit overrated, but we're talking dynasty. The fact of the matter is Jaylen Waddle is only 23 years old. If we look at what he did last year, of course, was wide receiver 15 on a points per game basis, had 142 targets for 104 yards, for 1,015 receiving yards, did a lot after the catch. If anyone knows, he was just an absolute speedster. Now you put Tyreek Hill on the other side. I think that opens a lot of things up. I think they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more with Mike McDaniel's offense. The other thing we got to think about is the fact that Tyreek Hill is about to turn 29 years old. And even though Tyreek Hill is an absolute monster, super fast, there's a reason the Chiefs let him go. I think we can all see what is going to happen. He's going to take a step back and then all of a sudden not be as dominant as he was. Even if he does take a step back, he might still be really dominant. But I think we have the time to see Jaylen Waddle absolutely develop and flourish and learn a lot from Tyreek Hill. And I think there's no reason to see or believe that Jaylen Waddle will fall out of a top 10 Dynasty rankings. He might, looking at into next year, but I'm saying if we're looking at this at the end of the 2023 season, there's no way that Jaylen Waddle is not in the top 10. Thanks so much for watching another video. Tomorrow we're going to jump into wide receivers 11 through 20. So make sure to subscribe, like, and get connected here tomorrow.